This is the Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 25, Keelhaul.
Welcome to the Requiem Metal Podcast. This is your host, Jason Hundy.
And I'm Mark Rudolph.
And what did we just hear there, Mark?
We just heard 360 by the Cleveland great and
very underrated
Keelhaul.
Keelhaul. And keel hauling, for those of you who
let the history teacher tell you about this.
Want a little history lesson. It was actually created by the Dutch Navy. I just found out during like the 1600s in their explorations of the world. And apparently, what it involves is you're tied to some sort of a rope, and you're dropped off the edge of a ship, and you're dragged under the ship, where in hopes that you'll either drown or get scraped by all the barnacles and mussels and things attached to the bottom, which will like cut you open.
Just the keel haul, yeah.
Yeah, so you get keel haul under the keel, and then you get pulled up on the other side, and by then the salt water is either dug into your wounds, or you've drowned and you're not alive. So
it's a pretty apt name.
Yeah, it's a cool name. And Keelhaul, as Mark said, hail from Cleveland, and that song right there in particular is from their record 2, which is, of course, their second full-length record.
Aptly titled.
Keelhaul is cool. I mean, this is a band that, just like a podcast we did a couple weeks ago, Blind Guardian, a band that, I had interviewed a couple times and kind of felt near and dear and that sort of thing, too. I think Keelhaul, for both of us, is a band that we're sort of endeared to because of our associations with them, actually.
Yeah, I mean, this is a band I've probably seen more than I've seen them half a dozen times, probably, and even at the record store that we both used to work at, we actually had a empty space next door, and we actually got these guys to come up and play, and that was huge. That was like the biggest show we ever
did at the record store.
A bunch of local bands support for them, and they were super stoked and excited. And
I'm curious what they think about that show. If they have that on their band website. Like, the worst show we ever played was Mount Pleasant, Michigan. Or
actually, compared to some of the other venues we saw them in, is a big space.
I think they were impressed that we threw together something pretty big for them.
And we got them money, and they were playing, I think, Lansing that previous night, or maybe the night after or something.
And if I remember right, because like we did, we met up with Keelhaul for the first time at Max, which is a bar in Lansing,
Michigan.
Lansing, Michigan, and we did an interview with them there and did like a really cool photo shoot, which pretty soon when we get the Requiem website up, we're going to have like the full issues of Eclipse and Requiem magazine.
You can go back and look at these old interviews.
You can look at some of these, but the photos in particular were hilarious because there was a cool like disgusting like old popcorn machine that looked like it had like black tar in it, and
just years and years of oil and not cleaning it.
It was nasty. We did like a whole photo shoot based around that, and the guys really enjoyed it. And then later on, I kind of interviewed Will, and I had a very humorous exchange of ideas. Some of his top 5 records and things like that were pretty clever, and so we always kind of stayed in association with Will, and I emailed him back and forth, and I remember mentioning to him one time that like it'd be great if you guys ever wanted to play here, we have a place available. And he emailed me and said, one of our shows got canceled, we've got an open night, like
if you get us gas money,
can you get us, if you could pay us gas money and give us a little bit of cash for food and stuff like that,
and we'll sold merch and stuff there too, and bought some stuff for the store,
and so we put something together. Mark, you made an awesome flyer, which you were saying you can't find it right now. I have one framed and stuff, but it's a really neat kind of experience, and we asked a bunch of the better local bands in the scene around that area, some of which are kind of big in Detroit now.
Follow, and did they play that one?
I can't remember. I know the band that's on our friend Mark's Saw Our Ghost label played. A couple of them did. The one that sounds very much like ISIS, which escapes my mind right now, and then the one that came from Ben and the Nain Rouge played. Okay. And then there was a couple other bands. Gavin Black, did they play?
Yeah, I'm trying to picture that flyer. It was like 4 or 5 bands.
I can't remember.
Pretty big deal.
I wish I had the flyer here, but it's at my place where Mark's recording podcasts here, else we'd check for you. But it was cool. Like, all these bands wanted to play for free just to play with Keelhaul. Like, they were like pumped because Keelhaul was kind of heroes of theirs. But anyways, kind of a cool story. And so we have a kind of a deep respect and are endeared to these guys, and we'd love to kind of spread the gospel of Keelhaul out to.
They kind of came out in an era where this whole like.
It's kind of the
metalcore thing was starting to like diverge off a little bit, and this was more like the Hydra-head art kind of end to it. But I mean, they came out at the same time as like Mastodon, which have gone on to huge success. ISIS,
Converge was starting to like do the Jane Doe stuff at this time. Cave-In was experimenting with Jupiter.
Cleveland's got a pretty interesting scene. You've got Craw and Boulder, which are pretty
Abdullah, which these guys, a couple of guys play in Abdullah. The drummer plays in Craw. Boulder, which is just a cool little band.
A great name for a heavy metal band.
If you've never heard Boulder, they're great. There's some other bands from that kind of scene as well. Lagratonia, I think some of the guys had some associations with, but they're an interesting hybrid of a lot of different musical sounds, as I'm sure you heard there. They do a lot of music that's mostly instrumental, which would fit in with like kind of what ISIS or Pelican or some of those bands kind of do. Neurosis to some extent. There's a big influence of theirs.
Well, I think they owe a lot to Neurosis as far as the vocal interchange between the guys. I can't even think of Von Till and what's the other vocalist?
Scott Kelly
and
Neurosis. Yeah. And here it's the guys that do them are
it's Chris Smith and Aaron Dallison.
Yeah. And one of the other things that you hear, obviously, besides kind of the metalcore, hardcore kind of sound, that I think is even more, predominant, especially in the song you just heard, 360 from 2, is the sludgecore kind of stuff. And really, Melvins, I Hate God, really the Melvins especially. That that's a huge, like, that thick slab, but still like got kind of their roots in like punk rock, hardcore.
I think even their attitudes that way. Everything's got a sense of humor to it. They don't take themselves too seriously, but they're a hell of a pack of musicians too. I mean, when Will's playing,
Will Scharf on drums is just he does some amazing stuff.
It sounds like a mess. So you see him play live. He had a piece of crap for a drum kit. I mean, it looked like the first one I ever had, and the way he played that thing, he ended up like breaking one of the kick drum pedals and everything else, but. The guy's he's like a free jazz drummer. Really, the way he's playing around with stuff, he's never plays like the obvious choice. Really creative stuff.
I think I would put him in the same league as Brain from from Mastodon.
I think
he's not as technical.
Brain's more technical. I think Will's more. He's got more emotion behind what he's doing. I think it's more. Not experimental, but he kind of goes more with feeling than technicality,
which is more like the improvisation aspect, the jazz aspect you were kind of mentioning and stuff. Which Will might kind of like laugh at something like that. He might just say, "I just play drums," But that's the thing about Keelhaul. You ask them kind of highfalutin questions, or you ask them like, man, you guys are like this really like interesting hybrid, and they're just kind of like they shrug their shoulders like whatever. We just play music, like they don't take themselves seriously at all, and that's unfortunate for them because I really feel like like you said they fit into this scene that was emerging in the late 90s, early 2000s, which is when their first couple records kind of came out. And that scene has now gone on and become huge. Look how big Pelican is. Look how big ISIS, Mastodon on major labels. Even Converge has had like this consistency to some extent. And it's almost like Keelhaul missed out on some of that, and it's kind of unfortunate. And that's not the only reason we're doing a podcast. One of the reasons, first and foremost, is we love these guys. And I
think all these 3 records that they put out hold up incredibly well. They don't seem dated. Like you go back and. If I hear like the first Dillinger record, it seems a little dated to me, and even some of the sequential records from that. But these guys particularly have really like it just stands the test of time as being really good music.
And I feel like I don't know why they just couldn't make it over that hump, in terms of like getting to that next level.
They didn't. I don't remember hearing much of a push. It was all like this kind of like grassroots thing. Like everybody like loved them that. Were musicians are involved in the music industry somehow, or worked in record stores or that kind of thing. But as far as just the public at large, I don't know what's there not to like about these records.
I know. And the first record they put out was on Escape Artists, which was a smaller label at the time, but it had a lot of street cred. I mean,
Gordon Conrad, who's pretty much I think one of the bigger guys up at Relapse Records now, he had a huge push behind all of his releases. Really believed in all of his bands.
Well, he did some of the ISIS stuff. I think Mosquito Control EP was on Escape Artists before ISIS moved over to Ipecac and some of that stuff.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of it. I can't think of any of the other acts that he had.
Well, Burn It Down was on there. Anodyne was on there, which Anodyne featured members of 27, and I mean, it's a great like early label to put your first release on because it's a small label with probably like 10 or 12 like really pretty high quality bands that can be promoted within that field. I mean, I remember when I did like all the hardcore ordering and punk ordering at the record store, I mean, anytime a new release would show up on Escape Artists, I'd order it because it just their standards of quality were pretty high. Let's put it that way.
They were like Hydra Head before Hydra Head really kind of got their feet in it.
Yeah, or the early years of like a Trustkill or band, labels that used to matter, that no longer really anybody cares about.
Yeah.
And so their first record was simply titled Keelhaul, and of course it came out in 1999 on first on Cambodia Recordings, which was, I guess, like some kind of co-op record label. I was kind of reading about it.
Okay.
And then it got re-released a year later in 1999 on Escape Artists. So actually it came out in 98 originally. So, and again, one of the elements you're going to see on this band is that there are vocals sometimes when they're necessary, but they're not afraid to just play a song that should be instrumentally. If they feel like all of a sudden singing 4 minutes into the song for the first time, they're going to do it. Like there's sort of this they play music for music's sakes. They're not trying to like sell records. They're not trying to like
there's not
big.
There's not a lead player. Everybody works in unison all the time, and if he doesn't have to keep the 4/4 beat going the whole time. He drops out, comes back in, and reflects the theme. If they use like vocals as an instrument instead of like a frontman kind of persona. So
yeah. And to me, like
they're democratic.
Exactly, and they're one of the other kind of influences that I think kind of we fail to mention is I hear a lot of like the old like Amphetamine Records kind of attitude and like style of playing, like Unsane, early Helmet, Jesus Lizard, just some of that kind of like anti.
Even like to some degree, like old Butthole Surfers and stuff like that.
Sure. I mean, it's all sort of mixed in there in a way, and you'll hear it especially on their early records when it's more coming out of like the hardcore punk sound mixed in with some sludginess. It's really on two.
I'm saying hardcore punk. That's like 80s hardcore punk.
Yeah, like Black Flag kind of stuff. Like or exactly.
Not like your Rancids and things like that.
Exactly. So. But it's there. Like I don't even want to say musically hardcore
like
punk.
attitude.
It's the attitude that they have, and they kind of just sort of shun that. If Melvins are hardcore punk, then these guys are like hardcore punk.
Sure.
If A equals.
I mean, they even have like a weird. I don't know if this is accurate or not, but like they have the feeling of like the Pixies to me. That same kind of vibe.
Yeah, I can definitely understand what you're saying with that, and they're not going to get more technical really until 2. I really feel like they kind of up their chops on the second record, and then they really start moving on 2 into a more progressive era where they start adding like the Isis Neurosis sort of influences a lot more, and they get more atmospheric. They get more kind of, you can even sort of throw some King Crimson in there to some extent. I mean, like in terms of like some of the stop-start kind of stuff that they're doing, and just a lot of the
way they play is not. It's not the typical way either. Just the way they go back and forth and flavor things, and it's just
some of the riffing is angular in the way that like Fugazi meets like Robert Fripp or something like that. It's just a really kind of strange way of playing guitar, and the drumming sort of stuff is like really kind of like it's really beat heavy. And
it reminds me a lot of jazz to be. I mean, not to some people think that's a negative, but
I think it's a positive in terms of like the scope of jazz that we're kind of talking about, like the 60s sort of energy era. The more kind of experimental type stuff. So anyways, you're going to hear that stuff, but there's also, like we mentioned Mastodon, there's like a Southern Fried sort of thing thrown in too. Like some of the instrumentals that they do like at the end of their records kind of have this like Leonard Skinner Corrosion of Conformity kind of feel.
Yeah, the LWM, I think that's going to be our show closer. It's just like this epic, like, walking into the sunset kind of song. I mean, it's great.
It's like, the end of the movie.
That's closing credits song.
Western, the hero walks off into the desert or something. But, you'll hear it. We won't play the song. We debated on playing it, but on the first record it closes with ESP, and then the second record closes with,
which I think is a more successful
LWM
attempt than the first one. But
so we're gonna hear a couple of tunes from their first record, Enervate and Fuimus, and don't ask me what those mean. So we're gonna hear those 2 tunes. We're gonna start with Fuimus, and then get into Enervate, and then I think we're gonna close out with a song from 2. Lackadaisical Chinese Tubesocks. And Lackadaisical Chinese Tubesocks comes from our favorite record, 2. I think, I don't know, in some ways, I'd love to hear what the next record is after Subject to Change Without Notice, which is the last Keelhaul that's been released.
Which they threw us off by not calling it 3.
Yeah, exactly. I was a little upset about that, but I'll forgive Will and the guys for that. But 2, to me, is like, it's focused for that early sound that they're kind of going for. I feel like they're really experimenting a lot on the third record, and that's great.
Well,
I like what they're suggesting.
It's written for the record, and these are written for, they could be singles almost.
Yeah, exactly. And they're more sort of singular pieces of music, which is why we started the show off with a singular piece from this, and we closed that last set with, kind of a singular piece. Lackadaisical Chinese Tubesocks has like a that part in the middle where the vocals come back in, and it kind of has that just utterly, I mean, it's almost based around a hardcore breakdown.
Yeah.
You can almost picture
tough
like,
guy core.
Tough core, the guy on stage, the vocalist kind of raising and lowering his hands, like, get in the pit, but it's almost mocking it in a way.
Yeah.
And then it really kind of closes out with just sludgecore, essentially. If the song kind of started off with some kind of more progressive elements and stuff like that, and then kind of got into more of the sludgecore stuff. But 2, not only did we review this record for the magazine, but this is when we interviewed the band. So I think we've latched onto this record as being, the era we were
of a time.
Yeah. I mean, this is the show they played was based on this tour, with us at New Moon and stuff. So it's not to dismiss the third record by any means, because I think the third record's probably better, but I listen to 2 more. If that makes any sort of sense.
It's more energetic. It's more immediate.
Exactly. More energetic and immediate. And then you can kind of pick that up from 360 and Lackadaisical. But, we're going to get into a big set from 2. And some of the things that are kind of happy on this record is that they're starting to, like, exercise some more kind of influences. On New Void, you're going to hear...
it's a Soundgarden Jesus Christ Pose riff almost.
It's a huge, grungy kind of... and Soundgarden in some ways has associations in the sludgecore. I mean, some of their early
Louder
records.
Love and some of the earlier stuff.
Exactly. And then it kind of, we're going to hear that in New Void, which is the song we're going to play next. And the beautiful thing about this is New Void kind of goes into this, like, it crashes into this 40 seconds of just, like, getting the crap kicked out of you.
Yeah. Falling down a hill or something.
I mean, I don't even know what you would call Unwound. It's really like almost like a grindcore song. Like a Dillinger song, maybe, is what you could associate with. It's just like a lot of, like, screaming. There's an immediacy to it that you don't hear very often, and especially in this era, the only bands that were doing anything like that with this sort of, like, short bursts of immediacy was Converge on Jane Doe, and then the early Dillinger stuff, where it was just like 40 seconds of just, like, kicking the crap out of you.
Face the mosh pit,
And it's sort of a beautiful sort of transition between the New Void song and this practicing tune, which, you as a drummer, you in particular have kind of...
I'm a drummer in quotes. I'm a drummer. It's a hobby of mine.
It's a hobby. But you said yourself you've been trying to play, like, some of these Keelhaul songs and practicing, which is where he's doing, like, this great cymbal work.
Yeah, a lot of cymbal shuffle. I mean, and everything he's playing, it's off time in a good sense. He's playing around beats instead of playing, like, on the beat all the time. And just the way he accents things and comes back in, and he's playing a really small kit. I think he's just got... as far as the drum kit itself, I think he's got a snare, a tom, a floor tom, and the bass drum. I mean, he's playing on a really stripped down kit, so getting that kind of stuff out of it's even that much more impressive.
Yeah, and I think there's a quote from back in the day, the review I wrote. I said, where the drummer takes the same approach, a cymbal guided doom missile that crushes dreams and eardrums alike. Doom missile always made me think of, like,
King missile.
Yeah, something or something like that Kuhn would say.
Yeah,
I don't know, like a. And then you're going to hear kind of a totally different kind of song for them. I call it, like, I equate it to, like, Neurosis playing an Entombed Clandestine, like, B-side. Yeah. And that's the song we're going to close things out. I don't even know why I might be completely off base with it, but it's so weird. Like, some of the vocals on 39F sound like the kind of badly, crudely kind of produced vocal stuff that Nikki did over top Clandestine, where obviously, like, they didn't have a real vocalist, so Nikki just tried to sing, and a lot of people have issues with that. I've always sort of found it sort of endearing and kind of charming in a way, how bad the vocals are. But there's almost that same like tone of screaming that you hear on 39F, but mixed with like this Neurosis sensibility. And again, you brought up this sort of trade-off vocal line that vocals that go back and forth between the main two guys in Keelhaul, and it's very it's evoked very well in a song like this. But I mean, two sold well at our record store. I mean, we promoted the hell out of it and stuff.
Sold probably 30 copies of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, why they didn't get more kind of attention for it, but
they toured a lot. I mean, the places they toured at were like your mom's basement, garages. I mean, tiny places. So,
and
who are they? Do you remember who they're touring with?
I don't remember who I saw them with,
because we saw them a couple times with different bands, but. Yeah, I don't know if maybe they just didn't see the right years, or they didn't have enough records coming out in the right times, because that's kind of king. I mean, ISIS has put out how many records? And
and it took them a while to really like connect. It
took them like 3 records to really kind of glom on, outside of the whole underground scene of all the like kind of art rock nerd kids that were totally into the thing. And then it finally, I think once they got into Epicac, that second record on Epicac kind of put them over the top.
Sure, and I feel like these guys really laid a lot of the groundwork that bands like Mastodon or Pelican kind of got successful off of. Like, had there not been the Keelhauls of the world, those bands wouldn't have had like a scene to like build upon. And it's almost like Keelhaul did a lot of the hard work and got almost no credit for it, and that's
kind of Cleveland for it, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. That's the
working man
class
city, and that always gets crapped on, but yet they come out with like unbelievable stuff.
Sure,
and Harvey Picar. I mean, all these like weird underground things that don't get huge success, but are like immensely important.
And I say like Cleveland in some ways has some associations. I like going back from like Rocket from the Tombs and stuff like that. That there's always been a connection between the sort of Detroit scene and kind of the Cleveland scene in a way, in terms of this.
But they're almost
kind
a bridge
industrial
between
working class towns that
bridge, like how the New York scene with Velvet Underground and all that crap, and then yet we had MC5 and everything. Cleveland was kind of like right in the middle there.
Yeah,
and not just geographically, but actually like music wise, they kind of embrace things from both of those sides.
Yeah, and I mean out of Rocket from the Tombs, you get what's the band that kind of re-recorded Final Solution and some of that after like Rocket from the Tombs kind of imploded? I'm drawing a blank. I want to say it's oh man, it's gonna bother me. I'll have to come back to it. But there's been like a lot of that sort of stuff that's happened in the kind of the Cleveland scene, and it's much the same way that for years MC5 and Stooges didn't get the credit that they deserved for kind of creating like the roots of sort of punk rock. The same way of like Rocket from the Tombs didn't get a lot of credit, and then Rocket from the Tombs became the Dead Boys. That's the band I was kind of thinking of. Like those are sort of like streetwise bands that never sold any records, but like people within the scene or within the music world love those bands and appreciated like how real those bands really were.
Yeah, I mean all the hippie feel good crap that was going on out in the West Coast, and then MC5 was laying it out. They were so political. The whole like White Panther movement, all this stuff was like unbelievable. Yet that's the stuff on the West Coast was the stuff that got all the attention, probably undeservedly. And then Velvet Underground for associations with like Andy Warhol and things like that.
But still, Velvet Underground didn't even really sell records. They just appealed to the right audience, who then went on and started bands, and stuff like that.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, they were just like this art house, this fixture in New York kind of thing with the right crowd.
And Cleveland just has never really gotten any kind of respect for much like Detroit in some ways. Like,
isn't that where the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's at?
Yeah, which is kind of ironic. But there's bands like the Gories and Dirt Bombs that have been playing Detroit for years and just can't. You
almost can't break out. I mean, White Stripes is kind of an anomaly, but yet they're white people on the outside coming in using Detroit as the the whole Kid Rock thing.
Sure,
but
so and I know these guys are proud of Cleveland and stuff, and I remember talking to them about that kind of in the interview and stuff, and there was a little sense of frustration, the fact that they couldn't kind of get out of that scene a little bit. So anyways, we digress, and we should get into some music. So I'm sure you don't want to hear us rant about the history of the socio-political history of Midwestern cities, but we're going to hear New Void and The Short Burst, which you might not even notice is another song, which is Unwound. Kind of gut punches you right out of it, which goes into Practicing, and then we're going to close things out with 39F, all from the album 2.
Just heard 39F, Practicing, Unwound, and New Void from the Keelhaul II record.
We're basically going to be playing almost every song from this record, except for I think 1 or 2 songs on here. But it's a pretty short record. But again, it's
a Rain and Blood, nice, quick, short. There's not a bad song on it.
It's the Rain and Blood of sludgecore, if you will.
There's the new sticker for the reissue.
Yeah, but they're going to kind of stay on Hydra Head with the next record, and do like Mark was saying before. Their next record's called Subject to Change Without Notice, and it was put out in what year was it put out? 2003. 2003, and in between this, they toured a lot. They put out a 7-inch with Anodyne on Chainsaw Safety Records. But, again, I don't know what the record sales were for 2, but clearly they felt they needed to kind of go in a slightly different direction.
It's a natural kind of progression from the last record.
Yeah, they just want to get more musical. They're writing, like you said, a whole record. Not so much singles where one song kind of bleeds into another and it's like thematic, it's kind of moving in just different directions.
Yeah, and there's that, what is it? Is it Shackleton? Or no, Tits of War, Chicken. I mean, basically, there's like a set of 3 or 4 tracks that almost bleed into one another. Like, if you take them out of context, it almost seems weird.
Yep.
Like, there's an anticipation at the end for something else.
And we did take one song out of context. We took HMG out of the middle of, like, this kind of 5-song kind of suite of music, but time constraints, by the record.
we feel the things that were presented on that song are, presented on other songs we played, so it doesn't necessarily need to be done.
And there's one song on here which I would have loved to have played if we had like 9 extra minutes, and it's Driver's Bread, and it sounds just like a Pelican ISIS song, and I mean that's something you didn't hear on 2. Like, you might have heard like sludgy kind of elements that ISIS and stuff, like the kind of the doomier, more atmospheric, neurosis kind of vibe was going on. But this is like a full embracing of like the more experimental nature of Hydra Head music. The song titles are getting just as sort of crazy as they were on 2, but
stream of conscious, like right on napkins, kind of. I mean, there's probably some inside jokes, and
but it's taking like kind of the botch kind of approach. I even hear like certain things going on here that remind me of botch. In particular, I think it's the Shackleton or Carl versus the 10,000 Pound Shadow has like a real botch kind of feel, like We Are the Romans kind of thing.
More like what the hell? This I'm trying to think of that song. The song title of the Soul Man.
C. Thomas Howell's The Soul Man. Yeah. There's just a lot of different things kind of happening on this record, and so it's kind of, Keelhaul hasn't put out anything since this, and so we don't know, what. The
last tour was 4 years ago.
Yeah, and I mean they've played a few shows around the Cleveland area, like according to their website and stuff. Because we kind of have been investigating these guys, like what happened to them? Did they break up?
I just assumed they broke up until I was just a couple days ago. I was thinking, I'll just listen to this. Like, it'd be cool to do a Keelhaul show, do a little bit of research, and like, what the hell happened to these guys? And
apparently they've written some songs, and they're still kind of like fine tuning them. I just read an interview from like 06 or 07, and he's like, yeah, we have some songs written, which is odd. I mean, I don't know.
From my experience, it's never a good sign when a band has that kind of much downtime between records, because it's either going to knock it out of the park or it's going to be like,
like the last Dissection record.
Yeah.
They had 12 years to write a record, and that was the best thing they could kind of come up with.
Or Saint Anger or something like that, that kind of thing, where it's just like, wow.
We were in the studio for 14 months.
Yeah, spent $40 million on it. It sounds like a turd in a trash can, yeah.
Which, to be fair, we should note, since this is a metal podcast, the new Metallica's decently good.
I think it's 60,
brilliant.
I think it's 60% good.
Yeah,
they managed to finally capture something, and you can't. I don't want to turn this into a Metallica podcast, but no band's going to capture that glory of their early years. No, you can't have that kind of fire anymore. That's
that youthful.
Yeah, rarely does that ever happen, but they did pull in some of that energy back. So I think that's important to be said.
But
all the slaggers, just lay
I'm sure you were all waiting out there in the podcast world for what do Mark and Jason think about the new Metallica,
which has already been off for probably a month and a half.
Yeah, but there's our definitive statement on Death Magnetic.
Go buy.
Reasonably good, 60-40.
Yeah, Rick Rubin put me over the top. So
thank you, Rick Rubin, for helping us. And if you like Rick Rubin, listen to the New Hours record. There, I'll say that.
Rick Rubin, you should find Keelhaul and produce her next.
Yeah, exactly. Resurrect Keelhaul. But anyways, Subject to Change Without Notice. The title itself is kind of like talking about where they're going. I mean, they're
it's kind of a mission statement.
Yeah,
for the album.
Subject to Change. We're just going to do what we want. We're going to write a record that we like and kind of go from there. So
and I think they kind of established early on that they can. There's no limitations of their style. They could go anywhere. Really. I mean, as long as it has that same kind of that feeling of unity between the members, like they can do whatever. They could do a free jazz record. They could do a stripped down punk record. I mean, or they could do a soundtrack.
And there's a lot of King Crimson progressive elements happening, I think, on this record more than anything else you've heard before. So let's...
almost some of those King Crimson elements filtered through Tool, filtered into Keelhaul sensibility.
Answer the Chicken has a real Tool beginning to it. It's either Answer the Chicken or Randall, which we're going to hear Randall like when we kind of close things out. But in particular, I'll find out for you because I can't remember which one it is, if it's Answer the Chicken or whatever, but has this like really awesome kind of like Tool, like it's
Tool. They have really distinctive like single note picking things that like they do the theme and then that kind of transcends the whole song.
Yeah, and it kind of adds like an eerie like kind of beginning where it's opening up into something.
It sounds like
bigger.
a chord played backwards almost. It's got that.
Neurosis does it a lot too.
Yeah.
I feel like so. Who knows what's influencing their sound at that point? If it's Neurosis or Tool, but
or just,
God only knows what else, because these guys seem like they're kind of off the map in terms of some of their influences. But we're going to hear a 5 songs here because a lot of these songs are kind of short. We're going to hear the Gooch, just one of my favorite song title, Carl versus the 1,000-Pound Shadow, Shackleton, Tits of War, which kind of bleeds right into Answer the Chicken. And any thoughts?
No, I'm just trying to think. If I was going to say anything about the Gooch or not.
Yeah,
I have a weird recollection that they talked about that in like the Jackass movie, that the Gooch is part of the human anatomy that
you can look it up.
That a man has.
That's what the internet's for. Look up the Gooch, and well, if you get into legal troubles, don't. It's not our fault.
Don't download anything.
Don't download anything. So enjoy some Keelhaul from Subject to Change Without Notice.
You just heard Answer the Chicken, Tits of War, Shackleton, which we'll talk about in a minute, Carl Verson, the 1,000-Pound Shadow, and the Gooch, which is indeed a part of the anatomy, which I assumed it was.
Yeah, and because it's a G-rated, PG-rated podcast, we won't get into that. But apparently,
UrbanDictionary.com, they'll tell you all about it.
Shackleton apparently is the sheer enjoyment of men wearing ladies' underwear when in the company of fellow men. And in case you need that, like you're at a spelling bee and you need it used in a sentence, these lacy French knickers made me tingle with sheer Shackleton. Is the sentence that you can find in Urban Dictionary. So leave it to Keelhaul and their sense of humor to keep it
Bringing
righteous.
New words into the lexicon.
Yeah, exactly. They're just trying to promote a new vocabulary of the world. That's me.
Okay.
So, but anyways, some good stuff there. We're gonna kind of close things out tonight with Randall, which is probably my favorite song on the last record that they did. And then again,
When Randall features a couple guest players, doesn't it?
Yeah, Cliff Meyer, which I'm not for sure which band he's from in particular.
Is he from Red Sparrows or from
Yes,
ISIS,
he is from ISIS and Red Sparrows. I think he's on this song. Is that Cliff Meyer that's on it?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't remember. I know they had a guest person on there, but I thought it was someone else, not just Cliff Meyer. But
Well, that's what the back of the record says.
yeah, and God only knows, the back of the record's never wrong. So, but aesthetically, it's a neat record. It looks a lot like the ISIS layout. I would imagine that Aaron did.
It looks like an Aaron Turner design, yeah.
Complete with what looks to be something from the boat. So it's kind of re-referencing some of the Keelhaul terminology.
Maybe the next record will be called Scuttled or something.
Scuttled, yeah. Or barnacles. Scraped barnacles. Hopefully not, because we actually
got that whole pirate crap going on. But
actually, did you know that this is sort of random, but I wouldn't know this unless my students told me that last Friday was National Talk Like a Pirate Day.
who brought that up?
I don't know. My students, who are strange people.
Wow.
Yeah. Some odd ones. These are the same odd ducks that have also
This isn't a nationally sanctioned holiday.
I don't know if it is.
Post office closed and everything.
But maybe Keelhaul.
No mail for you today.
Maybe Keelhaul could play at a National Talk Like a Pirate Festival in honor of their associations with the naval industry. Randall is a kind of a cool tune. It really encapsulates everything that I think their last record was trying to say, and maybe hints at in terms of towards the future what their future sound could maybe even sound like. Mm-hmm. And then, like I said, we're going to close with one of their kind of trademark album closing instrumentals, which is LWM from the 2 records. So we're going to kind of return back to where we began. But again, we hope that with a band like Keelhaul, there's a very good chance you may not have heard of these guys before, let alone heard them. And
see, with that glut of metalcore releases that we have, when everybody and their grandma was putting out the CD, it was easy to get stuff lost in the shuffle. But Hydra usually got a pretty good track record for their releases, but it's easy for stuff to fall through the cracks.
Especially in the era of like 96 to like 2002, 2003, Hydra Head was really like solidly consistent. Nowadays they've sort of become very trendy and there's kind of more hit or miss. I don't know if I trust everything that I find on Hydra Head, but I think also the glut of sort of ISIS Pelican kind of copycats, this so-called
the whole instrumental revolution thing that Mono had been doing for years before.
Exactly. Mono had been doing, Red Sparrows is out there kind of doing some stuff associated with it. There's bands that rise to the top of that, like Old Man's Gloom and
even like bands like Maserati that were around like kind of before all that stuff hit, that were doing pretty interesting stuff. Mm-hmm. Just that stuff
Conspiracy, which is more proggy, but and I feel like Keelhaul
Party Helicopters, weren't they similar to that too?
Yeah, Party Helicopters they weren't so much an instrumental band, but they were like
they had vocals,
an indie band with like sort of sludgy riffs, almost like an updated version of Only Living Witness or Quicksand.
Didn't it have almost like a Carcass meets Slint kind of thing?
Yeah, it was bizarre, for sure, and definitely like if you're into bands like that and you've never kind of approached Keelhaul before because maybe you thought they were like just a standard like metalcore band or just another of these sort of bands, they're definitely worth checking out. I mean, we've played a pretty considerable amount of their back catalog tonight, so I think you have a good feel for whether or not you dig them or not, and hopefully maybe if you could create a rumble in the underground, it maybe could give a jolt to these guys and let them know that like there's people out there that want to hear a new Keelhaul record.
Yeah.
And would like to see these guys tour. And if you ever get the chance, if you're in the Midwestern area and they're playing a local show or something, I mean, these guys are dynamite. They're right up there with Mastodon, you know, in terms of just like energy, tightness, and musicality, and just explosiveness. You know, it's a great time, and we've been lucky enough to see them, like we said, several times and stuff. So, and hopefully in the near future, when when we get the website updated, the Requiem podcast or requiemmetal.com, right?
No, it's just Requiem Podcast.
Requiempodcast.com. When we get that updated, there you'll be able to find a Keelhaul interview that's pretty entertaining, and Keelhaul reviews and things like that. So, along with many other fine heavy metal acts out there.
Sure. All from, 2001?
Yeah. Well, from 97 to 2002. So
actually from 93 to 2002.
When we get the Requiem stuff in there as well.
Yeah.
So you'll get a good feel of all this stuff. But if you have emails, comments that you want to make to us via email, or go to iTunes, leave some notes, let us know what you think. What we need to change, what you like, whether they're bands like Keelhaul, or in the previous weeks like Dark Throne, Blind Guardian, Carcass, all this sort of stuff. I mean, what you like, what you don't like. I mean, we're just sort of playing off of what we love, and we have kind of a diverse palette of sort of heavy stuff that we're kind of into, and Keelhaul kind of fits that mold. So let us know what you think at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Or, like I said, go to iTunes or go to requiempodcast.com, and you can kind of leave some notes and
leave some feedback. We'd much appreciate it.
Yeah, so we're going to close things out tonight with Randall and LWM, which is a kind of the triumphant Western movie closing credits instrumental that we talked about earlier. So hopefully you enjoy this stuff. So for the Requiem Metal Podcast, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark. you.